Why don't we get started? So talk to me about this. What I like to do first is I like to get to know you a little bit better, get to know what's going on as far as your studies are concerned. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what point you're up to?
Okay.
I know you have your test scheduled for later in the month. Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
All right. So talk to me a little bit about where you are and what's going on and what you're hoping to get out of today's session.
Absolutely, absolutely. So where I'm at today is what I've been doing is focusing on vocabulary. So my plan of action today was to go in, focus. I basically got two I want to say 2 weeks in a day, right? Well, yeah, 2 weeks
Yeah.
in a day. And so that was started this past Monday. So this week I wanted to take the time out to really focus on just the vocabulary, right? So what I've been doing is using the downloaded vocabulary worksheet
Yeah.
from the prep agent, and there's like 2 pages of words, right? So every day I would do 2 pages. Well, yesterday, well, what I found out was I can't remember 2 pages of words every day. So what I had to do is go in and say, okay, I'll try to do 4 pages a day, and that's 6 hours to maybe after 6 hours, really my brain goes numb at that point. Um,
Yeah. I'd say like if when you study every day, what I would say is this. I'd say you make it about like an hour and a half.
really?
Like like I mean, because if you're studying a lot like that,
Mhm.
you're just frying your brain. Yeah, it's way too much.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, no. You don't need to listen. Here's I'm gonna tell you what you need for the test to
And that's
pass.
that's what I really was. You said, "What am I wanting to get out of this?" Really, just some guidance. Like
Yeah, don't.
that's
Yeah,
what that's
go
what
out and see the light of day. Listen, because listen to what I'm going to tell you, and this is what I need you to understand is the truth. There is a point where you have overstudied and you will overcomplicate the questions. Okay, so the way to tackle reading comprehension tests, look, you're doing one of the right things in saying, "Hey, I need to make sure that I have the vocab down." Yeah, I like that. That definitely is one of the top things that you want to make sure you do. Get your vocab down. But you want to have just a simple post-it note definition of what the word is. You know, you don't want an overcomplicated, in-depth version because here's what happens on reading comprehension tests. Basically, you're asking your brain to do some sort of memory recall. You're like, hey, brain, what do we have on joint tenancy?
right. Yeah.
That's what it is. You're
Yeah.
going, brain, what do we got? What do we got? I have a
Right.
question on joint tenancy. And if your definition is, well, joint tenancy is like this and then that, and it's this long, convoluted, drawn out thing, it is hard for you to extrapolate a simple definition and then apply it to the scenario that you're looking at. Okay.
Okay.
So what happens is this, and how I relate it is this. My wife is an awful cook. She's horrible. And over the summer, I'm a very good cook. And over the summer, I was teaching her how to make mashed potatoes, one of my favorite dishes of all time. So what happened was I said to her, I made this statement. Okay. My wife is extremely literal. She's an Ivy League graduated doctor.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I said to her, I said, it is very good to whip your mashed potatoes. So input that. I inputted that into her brain. And it got to a point where I said, okay, I said, we're done whipping the mashed potatoes. And she said, well, why don't you whip it more? She said, it's good to whip the mashed potatoes. You just said that. And I said, yes, but there's a point where you whip them too much and it turns into, like chowder. I was like, I said, this is the right consistency that we want. I was like, this is perfect mashed potatoes. I said, more whipping, which we have established is good, makes it turn into something completely different. So same thing with your studies,
Gotcha.
you know,
Gotcha.
studying is good. Doing what you're doing is good. Do it for the length of a good movie every day. Hour and a half, 2 hours if you're on a roll, that's it. And then put it down.
Wow. Wow. I was
Yeah, yeah,
definitely
yeah.
overstudying.
Yeah, because what happens is this: you'll get to a point where it's funny. I've been teaching for 13 years, and I have a sign in my office office in Jersey. I have a sign that says over my desk, and my students who come into my office see it. Stupid people pass the test.
Hmm.
Okay. You're bringing way too much to the table if you overstudy.
Hmm.
Okay. Because what happens is this, you'll get a simple question like, what color is the black cat? And you'll go, I know these questions are tricky. I know you're trying to trick me.
Yep.
Orange.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and you have way too much knowledge for your own good. So you really do cut down the studies, you know, cut down the studies so that you're getting to a point where, again, you're not overdoing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's step one. Okay. That's step one. It's to recognize that, hey, look, you know, more studying is not going to be your key to success. Like I said, I like what you're doing as far as the vocab worksheet, because I think that that's an important thing to do. I don't want you to just focus on that though, because I'll tell you why. It's like, you know, I'll use another analogy. It's like going to the gym and just using one piece of equipment, you know?
Okay.
You want to use all the things. So if you're, you know, if you're a prep agent member and you're using the vocab worksheet, what I'm going to implore you to do is to, you know, jump onto the webinars, jump
Oh, I do that.
onto,
Yes. Yep.
you know, jump onto the webinars, do the exam prep ebook, you know, do some of the practice questions that are, you know, just do a master exam, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to start to help you develop a well-rounded knowledge base so that you could pass the test. And that's really, truth be told, that's what we're shooting for. You know, we're looking for what is the recipe for success to help us get to the point where we pass the exam. So that's what I would say I would start doing. Some of the things I would throw out and some of the things I would start incorporating is, you know, hey, do a little more well-rounded stuff, you know? So let me ask you this. How do you feel you're doing as far as your studies are concerned? How do you feel you're doing with the, with your understanding of the vocab worksheet? Like, you know, with the amounts of studying you're doing, I'm sure you feel good, but not like you're
Yeah.
probably not like, you know,
Well,
I could definitely be better.
I was going to ask you this because the way I kind of worked in with this, so it's funny because I would say I would do 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. In the middle, my wife would kind of quiz me as well, right? I would have her quiz me from a memory standpoint. Now, so I have a bunch of stickies in my sticky notes in my room, right? In my men room. And just the stickies around the wall. So that way when I'm looking at stuff, it just comes to me. But I watch because I'm a visual learner. So when I look at the worksheet just I write everything down. That's the first thing I do, right? I take it, I extract it, I put it on paper. And then read it that way. And then I'll go in and go through the webinars. I've done yours, I've done Joe's, I've done so I'm listening to the webinars to go with those words because what you guys kind of do with the way I kind of operate is help me put it into whether it be moo, you know, chatatail or, you know,
Yeah.
so when I see these words, that's what I hear. And my question to you is going to be that, but you told me to keep it simple. So, which makes sense. So I hear you guys in my head with certain words and I don't necessarily know the direct definition, but I know what they do. Is that okay? And because you know, boot or whatever the case may be. You know, I know it's the margin in between the 1031, but I couldn't tell you exactly like, okay, but when I see it, I know it when I take the practice exam.
So here's what it is. It's that you know it in context because what you're doing is this. And let me kind of explain. And this is one of the reasons why I say, you know, overstudying is bad.
Okay.
So what you're doing is you're trying to get the most in-depth version of what it is so that, like, here's the thing. If you know that boot has to do with 1031 exchange and you're like, hey, but I don't know much more about that. Listen to what I'm going to tell you. My question to you would be, well, hey, do you need to know much more about that? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so what happens is that's why when you study as much as you're doing, what happens is you get and if you notice something about, so if you do all the webinars, what you'll notice something about me is that I'm very concise. I'm very kind of like to the point and I kind of just round out my explanations. And also too, what you'll notice about me and the way that I use my language versus, you know, Cynthia, Joe, Adrian. And this is why, you know, it's good to be exposed to different instructors because we all do, you know, things a little differently. What I always say is this, when I explain something, it's not necessarily the prettiest version or the, you know, most fancy words, but it's a way that I understand it. I give you the stew version of what I think it is, you know, in my words, and it never feels like it's never a textbook answer, but at the same token, it's an answer that you could sit there and you go, okay, I see that that's the way Stu remembers it. That's the way that Stu manages to hear it, see it, understand it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So what happens is, because here's the thing, you have to understand, and it's taken me a long time to understand this. When I try to explain things to students, see what happens is this: I have a very big manila folder that I could go through. Like if we want to talk about joint tenancy, I have examples, I have things like that. I have a big plethora of things that I want to do. But here's the thing, picture this. In my head, how I organize everything is I have a little post-it note like on the front of every manila folder that says, this is what it is, reduced to the most ridiculous form. Okay. And what happens is you do not need to know more than that, because here's how the test writers write the questions so that you know and you understand. Because I could tell you're a very smart guy. What you're doing right now, a lot of the things that you're doing to tackle the study habits, a lot of the ways that you're tackling your approach, very good. But it goes back to like you sit here and you go, okay, I know what a boot is. I know that it has to do with the 1031 exchange, but I don't know much more about that. And it's like, you don't need to, though, because what's going to happen is this: the test writers, they're given a question, right? They're given a question. And what they do is, or they're giving a topic, they're given a topic and they say, can you write us a question that's going to be on the 1031 exchange? They're not going to be given hey, could you give us a question, write us a question for the test that is on the 1031 exchange specifically about the specifics of what a boot is.
Gotcha.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they're not going to go several layers deep. They're going to say, hey, can you construct a question? And what happens is they'll either say, do you want it to be more straight definition or do you want it to be situational based? So they'll say, no, please write us a scenario. Okay. And then they'll say, okay, I'll write you a scenario. And that's it. That honestly is how the questions come to be. Okay. So what I would tell you is this: how much of the practice exams are you doing?
So I just started doing those yesterday, because yesterday was my quote unquote review day. What I did was I just listened to like webinars yesterday and did practice exams so I can get the feel for what a test looks like. And
how are you doing with the practice questions?
I did really well. Even in the ones that I didn't know, I was able to kind of break them down. Like if there are certain words or certain, let's say, vocabulary words that was in them that I did know and some that I didn't know, I was able to kind of break those words down. So the thing with me, I've been in banking for over 18 years, right?
God bless. That's awesome.
So there's certain terminology because I did with loan origination and stuff like that.
So you know some of those things. Yeah.
Yes. So when I see them and I don't know, the one thing my wife was kind of shocked about is since I'm so visual, I put everything into like a play mode in my head, and it kind of like helps me, kind of go through them. So the ones I didn't know, I was still getting right by breaking the question down and making sure I see each one. The only thing I worry about is when I went over 20 questions, I started getting question fatigue. So I said, I gotta have a stamina, I guess.
Yeah.
My next question for you as well.
Yeah, and here's the thing. That's actually it's actually a really good question. I mean, like I said, you're approaching this the right way, asking the right questions. So I like that. What I'll tell you is this, okay? In regards to the question fatigue and things like that, I always tell my students this. I say, pace yourself. Pacing yourself is super, super, super important. And understand this. Like, I work with a lot of celebrities in regards to the real estate up where I am. And one of the people that I work with, I typically work with athletes. And I've gotten a chance to actually speak to and work with people who have pitched in the World Series, which is awesome. And one of the things I ask them, like one of the things I talked about when I work with them is this. I say, hey, what are some ways that you combat, like, focus, the mental aspect of it? Because there's a lot of that. And their answer to me was this. They said, and this one pitcher said, it was very, very, very interesting, said, you always have 10 seconds. That was what he said. He said, you always have 10 seconds. I said, okay, how do you use your 10 seconds? I said, let's say you say to yourself, I have 10 seconds. What do you do? And he said to me, I look at a blade of grass on the ground. He said, and I think of nothing. He's like, I think of nothing. I don't stress myself out. I don't do anything. I just think of absolutely zero. And he said, I just count to 10. He's like, you could do it every single question on the test. He said, he said, here's the thing. He said, how many questions are on the test? And I said to him, I said, like 100 and something usually for most states, depending on the state. And he said to me, he goes, yeah, he said, you could simply, just bottom line is, he said, you could easily just count to 10, say, okay, this is what it is, and then move on to the question, because you have to pace yourself. The fatigue is real, but what you have to do is understand that you always have 10 seconds. You always have it. You always have it. So instead of saying to yourself, okay, I see that I'm getting through the questions and, my brain's kind of turning to mush, okay, fantastic. Look at a spot on the wall. Don't think of anything. And here's the thing, one of your days, maybe you take a 30 question test, and you start using those techniques, because the test isn't all about knowledge. It's about how you approach it's the testing techniques. And here's another thing that I would recommend. Okay. Especially for someone like yourself, I think that you would actually really like this idea. Just type in reading comprehension test tips, okay, on YouTube. Okay. And here's the thing, part of your day, I would recommend watching a 10-minute video, watching a 5-minute video, because here's the thing, struggling with focus and things like that for a standardized test is something that's not unique to you. That's the beautiful thing about it. Like, this is something that you're not the only one to struggle with that. So go into YouTube and watch these, because here's the thing. Let's say between now and when you take the test, you watch 30 of these videos. If you walk away with 3 techniques that you're like, oh, I'm going to do that. Oh, I'm going to do that. That's going to make the test so much easier for you, Mm-hmm. So start doing things like that to incorporate a better understanding of what the test taking tips are that you're going to need to help you. And here's the thing, do 40 questions. I don't recommend that you sit down and pop out 100 questions, because that's mind numbing. That's way too much. What you want to do is you want to, sit there and just start using some of the techniques that you learn to get yourself through some of the questions, through some of the information. That's really going to start helping you out and helping you understand what you need to do for you. Because here's the thing, what I need to do for me might be different than what you need to do, to help yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Because a lot of times, people are like, so what are some things that I could do? And bottom line is this, I could probably give you 30 different tips, and you might sit there and be like, oh man, okay. Maybe this one's good. Maybe that one's good. Oh, that sounds like something that's great for me, So what you just need to do is figure out what speaks to you and what makes sense, and start using that in your studies and making it easier for you to potentially pass this exam, So
I like that. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, because I never thought about using that, and even using stuff like this as my study time, right? It's, I've taken 2 weeks off work so I can study for it, just because I'm going into it basically brand new. And that was my question to you as well, is like, if you had time in the day, right, to, obviously I got kids and things like that, so I have a certain time frame that I can kind of do this in while they're going. If you were just new and you were starting off and you were kind of walking this path, knowing what how would you kind of go about doing this? Is it, obviously you wanted, because there's certain words when I was doing the practice exams, I don't know, right? Just like I have to know most of the words in the vocabulary worksheet. Would you agree to that? Just like some type of.
So watch this. This is what I would say to you.
Okay.
Have what I think is this, what you're trying to do is you're tackling this from the point of view of, I need to get my doctorate in real estate and I need to know the in-depth version of everything. Okay. And then what happens is you typically get the in-depth version of a few things, and then you get the surface level stuff of some other stuff. What I'm saying to you is this: the best way to study, the best way to tackle this, is to understand you're not looking for more in-depth definitions of the things. You're looking for the simplest version of it, the simplest explanation of it. Okay, So what you want to do is you want to have a very, very oversimplified definition of more words than less words. So basically, your goal isn't, I want to learn all the words as best as I can. Your goal is to keep everything down to a post-it note size thing. Just that is what you want. Because here's the thing, okay? If your brain, if you have a question on, like I said, joint tenancy, and your brain goes to, if I said to you, hey, what's joint tenancy? And you go, joint tenancy is like when, and you go through this long convoluted story, okay? What happens is your brain has to extrapolate a definition from that, a simplified definition, then apply it to this other scenario you just read, and then decipher which answer is the best one. That's where people get confused. People get confused because that's why I have a sign in my office that says stupid people pass the test, because people who come to the test with less information pass because they keep it super simple. That's because all they have is the simpleton version of it. They don't have the doctorate thesis version of it. You don't need that. You need simplified. If I ask you the definition of something and you say it's like, and you go through an example, cut the example out. Say, okay, no. How would you describe this if you just had to describe it?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Examples help you understand.
The first thing that comes to my mind is regulate. For police power, right? They regulate.
Yep.
Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, what it is for me is I always go with, like, police power. I'll give you my definition. Police power is the government's power to regulate for public safety, which encompasses a lot of things like zoning, policing, building codes, stuff like that.
But it doesn't. But it's not me. Because I'm happy that you said that, because it's not me having to go in, because when my wife is testing me and we're doing it together, and I don't remember it, I kind of beat myself up, like, dang, why did I remember to add zoning to it? So to your point, though, that
makes sense. What it is this. I always tell my students this, because they always say, you always have a really good definition. It's well-rounded. And I say to them, well, yeah, when you have 13 years to refine a definition in your head. I'm like, yeah, no, I say to them, I say, look, I should have a really good explanation of it. But, also too, it doesn't take, it doesn't take much more brain power to say, okay, like, what else? Like, what else? Because here's what happens. And I think that what a lot of, and I'll tell you how I have done it in myself. For me, I'm going to give you the Stu way of how I do it. What I do is, and this is how I also prep for lectures, is so I live down by the water. Okay. And what I like to do is I take index cards. I'm a big index card person, because I think that anything worth saying could fit on an index card, and then you could extrapolate on that. Like, if you know a subject and you could talk on it, you could do that. So what I usually do is this. I go to walk down by the water with my dogs, and I take an index card that has maybe 5 words on it that I'm doing. And I just talk about it. I just talk about it as if I'm sitting down. How I, learned how to teach was I pictured my best friend sitting with me at a coffee shop. Okay. And I pictured them saying to me, Stu, could you explain joint tenancy to me? And I would have to explain it to them in my simplest terms, and it caused me to have, I would have a more in-depth version of the definition than I'm telling you to go to war with. But what happened was that I would then shave that down to, okay, here's the overarching, most encompassing definition. Let's shave it down to its most concise form.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is this. That's why, you sit there and you go, and here's the thing too. I don't like hard word association where you say, and understand, like, a lot of what I've been saying to you is I want you to have a concise definition, not word association, because here's what it is. The difference between word association and concise definitions is definitions are more thorough than a word association. So let me give you an example of something that happened with a student the other day. We were going over a question, and the question said, what is a brief digest of the items affecting title to a property? Brief digest of the things affecting title to the property. And the answer was abstract of title. They chose, and listen to this, they chose chain of title, or they chose something else. And I asked them, what's your definition of of an abstract of title? And they said a summary of the items affecting real property. So I said to them, I said, okay. I said, you said a summary. They said, yeah. I said, why didn't you choose a brief digest? And they said, well, it didn't say summary.
Yeah, because
And that
it's a hard. You're looking at it from a. That's me. I'm so literal like that too. I would be the same.
yeah, and what happens is this. I say to them, I say, because here's what you have to understand, and this is why I say, hey, like if you remember, like a couple minutes ago, I was like, oh, it's fantastic to get exposed to different instructors. Why is it great to go on to the webinars? And and I always tell people are like, oh, I have a favorite with the webinars, like I really like your webinars or like Cynthia's. And I say, it's really, what's funny is I jump on Cynthia's webinars because Cynthia teaches very different from me. And I like being exposed to the way she words some things sometimes, because that's not my style of teaching. That's not how I would ever explain it. But I like hearing, okay, that's another way that a teacher could word it, because that's also, you have to understand, there are different authors for the test. So you might get an author for the test question that you have on abstract of title where they use the word summary. And then you might have one that might use the wording brief digest. They're both correct. It's just if you have a hard word association where you just sit there and go, no, abstract of title must be summary, then what happens is you're going to struggle when you see a different wording of it. And it's not because it's wrong. It's just that's the way they chose to use the syntax in the English language. And that's the whole thing too. A lot of these words could have synonymous aspects to them where they're going to use something different. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And that's the reason why I kind of like listening to both of you, all of you guys actually, for me, because I like.
But I'm your favorite.
Yeah. That's why I have you on now.
Listen, I usually could guess, whenever I have someone in a private lesson, I'm like, I take it that, my style was just something that spoke to you. And it's funny because, just as much as my schedule's booked up, Cynthia's is as well, because there's, and I always tell people this, I say, sometimes, because I have a very northeast way of teaching and speaking, and my syntax is
that's probably why.
Oh, so where you're from?
Well, kind of northwestern, but Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, love Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's one of the. I remember when I first went to Pittsburgh, I didn't realize how beautiful and scenic it was.
Yeah, it's very old, so it's like old timey. It takes you back a lot. So
yeah, it was.
I stay in North Carolina now. When I go back, I'm like, man, I didn't realize how old it was, but.
Yeah, it's really like, I think Pittsburgh was one of the towns, like I used to travel a lot teaching and training people across the country. And that was one of the things that just struck me. Like, I didn't think, like, I just kind of said, like, I remember my wife has never been to Pittsburgh either. And she said to me, she goes, oh, what do you think Pittsburgh's going to be like? I said, I don't know. I said, I've never really seen photos. Like, I've never seen anyone like post like, photos of Pittsburgh. I was like, I don't know what to really expect. And I was driving in from the mountain I was driving down into the city, and I was like, oh my God, this is gorgeous. And like, I took a picture for my wife, and my wife said to me, she goes, oh my God, that's so pretty. And that struck me about about Pittsburgh. So that was just a cool little side note. I never thought that I would actually say, because I've been to some crazy beautiful places. I mean, one of the most gorgeous also is Sausalito, California. I mean, I've been like crazy places, and Pittsburgh just always struck me. I was like, wow, that's just really undersold and understated.
It really is. It's really but you know what? Because it's more Western, I guess people recognize Philadelphia first because it's like close to that New York.
Yeah. Philly's the place that, like, because I live in Central Jersey. I live by the Jersey Shore. So
okay.
And I'm from New York, and that's why, like I said, I have that, faster kind of talking. So that's why when I speak to some people, and if you're in North Carolina, that, like, North Carolina, South Carolina, there's some people there that I would talk to or I would teach that they're like, oh man, you're going 90 miles a minute. And it's like, for people like that I interact with on a daily basis, it's like, this is normal.
It's normal, yeah. for me, this is normal.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. That's why, like I said, I know that the students that I usually work with, I typically have students that gravitate towards me like that, but yeah, I mean, going back to the studies and what you're trying to get out of it and everything, I think that one of the things that you want to do is, like I said, you want to kind of direct yourself to picking up some of those reading comprehension test tips, right? Like, I think that's going to be something that's going to help you. I think also, changing I don't want to see you do hard word association, because again, you could get tripped up in that. Understand, because especially when you start doing more of the reading comprehension test test questions, you're going to see, once you get out of vocab world, the way that certain questions are worded, people always say it's tricky. It's not. The question's always self-containing. Understand that.
Okay.
There's nothing you need to add to the scenario. It's typically, if you look at a question, you think it's tricky. If you take a step back and hear me saying it's not as tricky as you think it is, just read the question. What are they asking you? If you do that, you will get more answers right than you get wrong. You'll be good if you do that. You take that step back, you'll really start to develop a way to approach the questions that's going to help you get to the point that you need to, which is just pass this darn test.
Exactly.
I mean, look, it's a means to an end. I mean, I always tell people this. I go, you learn this stupid stuff, and you do it so that you get to a point where, again, you're doing what you need to do to pass the exam. Okay. And it's about being well-rounded. It's almost like training for a marathon, where, because my father-in-law, he trains for marathons, and a lot of what he does a lot of upper body. He does a lot of core strength stuff. The one thing he does the least of is actually run. I say to him, I always say all the time, I go, why don't you run more when you're training? And he says to me, he goes, I know how to run. He's like, I know how to do that.
Yeah.
He said, I need to do all the other things. He said, a lot of people, because he said to me, he said, someone like you, that's what he always says to me. He goes, someone like you would just assume that all I do is sit there on the treadmill and I run. He's like, but you have to understand. He said, a marathon's not about, he said, if it was just about running, he said, all I would do is just go to the gym and run. He said, yes, you're right. He said, but do you know what happens at like halfway through a marathon? I said, tell me what happens. He goes, he said, if you do not know how to breathe and you do not have the core strength, he said, your body gives out. He said, your legs could be fine. He said, if you physically could do it, he's like, your legs will be fine. He said, your breathing will be all out of whack. He's like, your back will start to hurt. He said, your legs will be fine, but your back will start to hurt. Your lungs will start to, not hold the capacity that they could. He said, and then you'll get less oxygen to your body. He said, then you'll start feeling lightheaded. He said, you're not feeling lightheaded because you haven't eaten or anything like that, or you haven't done anything like that. He goes, no. He said, it's because you haven't trained your core and your breathing is all off and you're doing it. He said, you were focusing on the wrong stuff. He said, I know. He said, I've gotten to the halfway point of a marathon. And he said, I know the people that have not properly trained. He said, because you get to the halfway point and you see them and they're getting lightheaded and they're dropping out. And he said, they haven't, he said, they're losing, he said, the oxygen, he said, that oxygen filling their lungs and taking nice deep breaths and steady breaths and developing the core. He's like, that's more important to finishing the marathon than making sure that your legs could actually carry you.
That makes sense though. That makes, because what you're telling me essentially is, hey, listen, just know the basics. Don't hardwire yourself to where you have to see this particular word to get it, right? Just make sure that you have an understanding of the definition. So that way when you see it and you can comprehend it, that's good enough, right? So,
yeah.
But also what I need to start doing instead of just focusing on, because essentially the last 3 days is when I started. I was focusing on vocabulary, then turning that vocabulary into paper, then putting that from paper to webinars, and then go from webinars to flashcards or practice exams or learning it with my wife so I can learn it all, right? But to your point, what was happening for me was I was like, I know it. I know all these words from my standpoint because I listen to you and how you associate them. And it's funny because I hear you guys' voice in my head now. Like I just hear your voice, right? So,
yeah.
And then I started getting frustrated because there was one section where it talks about titles, right? And, and it did, but I couldn't find webinars on it, and or in the you know how like on the exam prep videos they have
Uh-huh.
like certain things on it, like as far as like certain titles
Yep.
for the videos, and I didn't see any that kind of specifically spoke to titles like the alternate policy title. And I'm such a visual so I was trying to Google it, and I was
Yeah.
like, I just want to be able to visualize these things. And I was stuck, and I was always like, why are you getting so frustrated? I was like, I just have to visualize everything. Like if I can hear it,
Yeah.
see
And
it.
here's the thing too. Like here's what I will tell you. You'll notice a lot of stuff that I do, a lot of stuff that I think makes sense for, me and my students. And also too, I'm going to show you have you stumbled upon my YouTube channel yet?
No.
Okay. And I think that you're going to like this, and I'm going to explain to you why, because there's one thing I do on my channel, and I'm going to email you a link to it.
Okay.
There's one thing I do on my channel that's a little different than what Joe even has, is this. I go through, so I have a section on my channel where I go through different test questions. Okay. And what I do in the test questions is this. I explain them for about a couple minutes, like 2 to 3 minutes. I talk about why certain things aren't the answers. So watch, if you go to playlist and you go to my what is it, the real estate exam daily practice exam questions, and you'll see that's me spending 4 minutes on one question.
Okay.
Where what I do is, and there's almost 200 videos in there where literally I spend 3 to 4 minutes talking about why the wording leads you to that answer, and why it's not this one, why it's not that one. And it's basically like a quick little thing. So if you are extremely visual, right, and you're venturing into the realm of answering questions, and you're just starting that, one of the things I would implore you to do is do exactly that. Go in here and take a look at, like I said, and I put out new ones every week. So like you're going to get, new ones all the time. And this is one of those ones that there's people who just literally sit there and go, yeah, I just sometimes watch, 30 minutes of your, real estate questions and just, click through them and just go, yeah, okay, cool. I get that. I get why that's that. Because I think a lot of the times what you need to do is you need to see how they word it,
Yep.
how you apply, because I think that where your disconnect is, and that's like where you're kind of getting frustrated right now, is you're like, Stu, I've done the vocab, I've done all this, and then I get into the questions, and I just started getting into it, and it's not jiving exactly. Like you're feeling more like it's square peg round hole than it is square peg square hole, because it's not like because here's the thing, the questions aren't always okay, what is joint tenancy? Boom, you could answer that, right? You could look at 4 answers and go, oh, that's that.
Yeah.
What they'll do is they'll give you a scenario where they'll be like, okay, so A, B, and C take title as joint tenants, and now B dies, and then C sells their property to E, and you're like, okay, so they're like, how does everyone own property now? And you're like, well, no, I know a definition of joint tenancy, and you're like, but you just so what happens is it's taking that knowledge, and saying, okay, how do we apply it? How do we apply that critical understanding, that critical knowledge, and how do we apply it to the questions? And it's a totally different skill set. And that's why I'm saying to you, incorporate some of the questions. Take a look at some of these videos, because especially, like I said, if you're a visual person, like what I do is I'll put like a question up on the screen, and like I'll show you what it kind of looks like. And these are some of the earlier ones, so it's not going to be as visually appealing as some of the newer ones. I put the question right up on the screen. I put it right up on the screen, and I go through, okay, this is what it is, right?
Oh, I love that. Oh, that is
Yeah. So what happens is, and I talk through it with you. So, I mean, here's the thing. You have 3 minutes of me talking about why something is the way it is and why that answer is going to be this, and it's not. And here's the thing. These 3 to 5 minute videos are not webinars, right? They're not 40-minute webinars where I discuss what something is. This is strictly the, hey, okay, you've been to one of my webinars, you've heard me explain it, you have the concise definition. Now let me explain how we're going to apply it.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? And what happens is, also it goes to, how do they word certain things? How do they do certain stuff? So if you go to my channel and you also see, if you type in, so like when you're at my channel, if you type in the word, I think that you could search the channel. YouTube's a fun little animal. So you could search the word for tricky. And watch this. I go through, I actually usually word, like when I have a tricky question, okay, I go through it, and what I do is I go, okay, this is one of the tricky worded ones, or what you would, or what a student would come to me and say, oh, this is worded a little tricky, a little weird, you know? So like, you know, I'd look at something like this and let me see what the wording of this one is. So this one is, you know, okay, 4 people bought an investment property together, each having an equal ownership. They took title such manner that if one died, he could leave the interest to their heirs. How did they take title to the real property? So let me ask you that. Since we're looking at this question, right?
Yes.
What would you say is the answer to this one? You know, because this is, you know, this is something that there's a couple words in here that kind of make it so that you're like, oh, okay, this is like this. So what is this one?
So if I'm reading this, 4 people bought an investment property together, right? So they
Yep.
bought it together and they have equal ownership. Equal ownership, you break that down, which tenants in common. See, I didn't learn all these words just yet. The tenants in common, or the joint tenant right of survivorship. They took title in such a manner, if one dies, he could have his interest to his heirs, right? So it's going back. So I would choose A, joint tenants with right such survivorship.
Yeah, that's typically what most people do in this question.
Really?
Okay, and this is why it's tricky. Yeah, this is why it's tricky. So watch, I'm going to tell you what it is. So 4 people bought property and they have equal interest. So equal interest. So here's what's funny. Most people kind of key in on that. They go, oh, they have equal interest. And I know in joint tenancy with rights of survivorship that you have to have equal interest, right? That's where people's brains go.
Yeah, that's where mine went. Yeah.
Right? And yes, you're correct in that statement that in order to create joint tenancy, that you have to have equal interest. You have to have the unity of time, title, interest, and possession. Okay, so one of them is, you know, just that you need that. So that's where people are like, oh, they're telling me that, so it must be this. But the key here is they took title in such a manner that if one died, he could leave his interest to his heirs. So they would be taking property as tenants in common, because in joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, do you have the right to will it to your heirs?
No.
There you go.
Yep, because years in Tennessee, obviously no. Yep, Tennessee.
Yeah, because years in tenancy is not a thing. Year to year tenancy is just basically.
I see what you're saying. I see what.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like your brain just went to, you were hardwired. This is what you did. This is what you did. And here's the thing. This is why you need to see things like this, because you did what most of my students would do. They go, oh, they had equal interest. But couldn't you have equal interest in tenancy in common? Yes, you could. Just because you have equal interest doesn't mean automatically, boom, yeah, it's joint tenancy. No.
Okay. I see it. I like it. Okay. I like it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. That's why. So like if you're in the Facebook group or you're in any of or you're participating in the webinars, what you'll notice is this. People never fail by like 30 points. Never do. They never do. Like you'll never see someone come onto the group and be like, I failed by 30 points. Okay. Never happens, because people are not getting questions wrong because they don't know what it is. Like you knew exactly what joint tenancy was. I believe that. I believe that in my core. But I believe that you looked at this and you went, yeah, no, this is, equal interest, then it must be joint tenancy.
I see what you're saying now. Instead of hardwiring yourself to just one thing, because to your point, it sounds like some of the questions may have 2 answers in them, but you just have to kind of really read it, right? Really read it. And
it's understanding what the question's asking you. Because do you remember like there was a point, where we were talking earlier where I was saying to you, hey, what happens is people don't realize what the question's actually asking.
Yeah.
So like in a question like this, you have equal interest, yes. But the crux of it, what makes this different than answering other questions, is that yes, this is, this is something that you basically, have equal interest, but also they're saying like the kicker, the one that makes it tenants in common versus joint tenancy is that in joint tenancy, you cannot give it to your heirs. You're basically giving up that right. That's why. So here's the thing. Like, I'll give you kind of like the doctorate version of joint tenancy and tenants in common. The reason why they make the requirements for you to get into joint tenancy is because they never want to. Joint tenancy is never going to be assumptive or created by operation of law. And what I mean by that is there's never going to be an automatic situation where you're like, oh yeah, you're taking title as joint tenants. Yeah, ta-da. Because what you're doing essentially when you take title as joint tenants, you're giving up your right to devise the property or to will it. So what happens is the government and the courts and everybody wants to make sure that, hey, if you're getting into joint tenancy and basically giving up your right to will the property, we want to make sure that you want to get into that. So you have to meet certain requirements and then state that you want to create joint tenancy. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So that's why that's the situation there. And again, that goes back to, like, here's the thing. For how much you're studying and for how much you're looking at this, the path to success for you does not lie in more knowledge about it, because here's the thing. This isn't a knowledge. The reason you got this wrong wasn't knowledge. It wasn't because you didn't understand joint tenancy or tenants in common, right?
Yes.
It was because you didn't fundamentally understand what was being asked of you.
And that's like you said, that's part of the whole picture, like the marathon, right? I got to work.
That's breathing with the marathon. That's developing your core. That's sitting there, and how you get better with that is, again, not more time. It's not, I need to study 6 hours a day. I need to whip my mashed potatoes until it's, corn chowder. No. It's, you have to sit there and it's doing the right things. It's, like my father-in-law, he doesn't go to the gym to practice for his marathon more. He does the right things. Yep. He goes in there and he goes, yeah, I do crunches. He's like, like when I see him go to the gym, he gets a medicine ball and he's doing crunches and he's developing his core. He's doing a balance ball, and I'm like, why is he doing, like, and like I said, it just didn't compute to me. I was like, why is he doing that to practice for the marathon? I was like, because I didn't get that. I didn't understand it. And, again, it has that correlation right back to what we're doing here and what you're doing in the, practicing for the exam, because your brain, because again, you're a smart guy. And this is why we're having, like, my sessions don't typically go like this, where I'm like, because what happens is this, typically we jump right into material. Right. It's like boom, dive right into material and we start going. Like if you go and look at some of my other some of my other private lessons, that's typically what we do. But you and I, what we're doing is, and I'm not saying my other students are stupid, I'm just saying they have a more of an issue where they don't understand joint tenancy, and we have to explain joint tenancy. We have to explain tenants in common, so that's where they're lacking. You, with how much you've been studying, your lacking isn't there. Your lacking is, okay, you haven't been exposed to the questions enough to understand because fundamentally you need to develop that situation where you understand what's being asked of you. And how you get there is shaving down your definition so that you don't confuse it. Because here's the thing too. Also, when you have a very simple definition of things, makes it much easier when you're unpacking it and you're going through it, because if you know joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, you're like, no, rights of survivorship means that, it transfers to the other joint tenants. So can't transfer to your heirs in joint tenancy, simple stuff. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see exactly what you're saying, and it makes perfect. I'm happy I did this because that's not because and this is one of my last questions to you, Stu.
Yeah.
I give is, I know this is going to sound weird. Did I give myself enough time?
Sure, absolutely. So a couple things we're gonna tell you. Ready? Thing one.
Put this literal person, very literal. Like, I guess that's my biggest problem.
So here's what I'm going to tell you. Number one, there will never be a day that you will wake up and you'll feel ready.
Okay.
It's not going to happen.
It's like having kids almost, I guess.
Listen, it's exactly almost like that. Like there's never going to be a day that you're going to feel that you're ready. And yeah, it's like having kids where you're like, listen, as a parent, you know that you're going to mess up. It's one of those things that I'll never forget this. Like I don't have kids right now, but me and my wife, we're planning on starting a family.
Right.
And I was at a barbecue over the summer, and I will never forget this. This was, and you'll appreciate this a lot. My mother-in-law, I said to her, I said, I know so much. And she goes, uh-huh. And I said, I know like all the things that I did as a kid and all the ways that I weaseled out of things. She goes, oh, okay. And I said, they will never, I said, when I have a child, they will never be able to pull the wool over my eyes. She laughed so hard, she almost threw up. She laughed so hard that she was dry heaving in the corner. She said, and this is what she said. She goes like this. She said, they're never going to pull she said to me, she goes, they're going to be in diapers and they're going to be pulling the wool over your eyes.
That's what my kids are doing now, because they're two. So yes.
Yeah. She said, oh man, this is what she said to me. I'll never forget it. And she said the most Southern thing to me. And my mother-in-law is not Southern at all, but it was funny. And you'll appreciate this if you're living in North Carolina. She said, oh, bless your heart. She said, you think that you're going to be running the roost and doing all this? She was like, no. So yeah, I mean, yeah. You're never going to feel that you're going to wake up one day and you're going to have this epiphany that you're ready. Like it's not going to happen. So don't wait for that day. Okay. The test that you take, okay, has about a 40% pass rate. Okay. It's about a 40% pass rate. So what I want you to understand with that is everyone has a higher chance of failing than they do passing. Like, so like this might be one of those things that you prepare, you do all this stuff, and that you might have to take it 2 to 3 times. Like I am one of, I will tell you this, okay, just to put it in perspective, okay, I'm one of the top instructors in the country, most sought after kind of thing. And I don't say that to puff out my chest. I say that to put perspective into things, okay? I tell all my students this all the time. I go, when I take a practice exam, I don't get 100. I tell them, I go, there are moments that I read a question and I go, oh, I see where I went wrong there. Like I answer something like this and I'm just like, it's you catch me answering this question, like maybe 30 questions in. And let's say I'm not focusing, like you said before, your brain's kind of getting a little mushy, getting a little soft. This might be a situation where you sit there, you go, yeah, I really, I guess, yeah, a joint tendency. And guess what? It's a human response. But what we're looking to do is for when you take the test is to mitigate those, is to basically sit there and get to a point where you have less of those scenarios, less of those situations than you do anything else, So that's really one of the things that I would probably impress upon you the most, is that you're never going to feel that you're ready to take the test. And also what you need to do is you may need to, and I don't know, and you won't be able to know this. What you may need to do is take the test once to understand what it is that they're being asking of you. So some people need to take the patina and the mystique of the test.
That's me. You hit it right on the head. Any test I've ever taken, and I, it's sorry to say for myself, I've never passed it the first time. It's always because the anxiety of any test in the beginning. And then once I know, I'm like, oh, okay. Fear
of the unknown. That's why I'm saying to you, that's why, listen, there's some students I say to them, I go, look, if you need to reschedule it, yeah, cool. Like there's certain students, and here's the thing, my advice isn't a one size fits all kind of thing. I typically err on the side of, hey, you're never going to feel ready, and just go take it. Like there were some students that I've, tutored that I have said 100%, hey, I wouldn't set the bar really high for yourself. Like, I don't know that you're going to come out of this on top, because again, you have to understand, we're talking about a nationwide about a 40% pass rate, you know. So when you drill down to even some state level, you know, you skew plus or minus, you know, points that way. But this is not a test that 60% of people pass. You're talking at least less than half of the people pass.
Yeah.
You know, so if not more than less than half the people. So and part of the reason is because also people study the definitions. Listen, because they go in there and they don't have instructors like myself saying to them, this is a marathon. And when you're training for a marathon, you don't just run on the treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is everyone always plugs away at, I need to know the definitions. I need to know this information. I need to know this. And they don't realize, hey, listen, what's going to cause you to not pass the exam or to not finish a marathon is your breathing, not your running.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
That's it. That's it. That's why you're sitting there going, I'm doing definitions. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And then all of a sudden I give you a question like this and you're like, hey. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're forgetting about the breathing. And that's why if you watch those YouTube videos where you have the reading comprehension test tips and you start doing that kind of stuff, what happens is as you implement those things and you pick up an idea, like you see you start using my 10-second tip, things like that, mm-hmm. You're going to see that you're going to start doing better on the practice exams. You're going to be able to pace yourself and it's going to help you a little bit as far as that's concerned. But what I want to ask you is this, because I think that you and I had a really good session. Mm-hmm. Because I think you got a lot out of it. I did. And what I want to do is I do select some sessions that I want to share with people, okay. Just so that they see it, they see what we do, see the differences in, you know, the kind of teaching styles that I have. Mm-hmm. So, and I also think that a lot of things that I've said here might help students in the future. So would you have any issues with me sharing this on YouTube or sharing this with other students?
Absolutely not. And it's funny because I was going to ask you if I can record it at the bump so I can just kind of go back to it.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. So since you gave me permission, I'm going to send you a link to the webinar once I to the private lesson once I upload this, because I think that like I said, we went over some things that are a little different than most other sessions because I usually jump right into material. But I think that for someone who's studying as much as you are, I think that you needed to kind of get an idea as to, okay, how do I tackle this? How do I get around this? And how do I kind of put my head together so that I get to a different path? And also kind of like I said, showing you that breathing is more important than necessarily running.
Yep. And that's the way I'm going to take it. And this is my last question to you, Stu, and I know we're out of time. So the last question would be, and just because I'm still literal, I know I'm going to put all these techniques into play, but because I start to get the education piece, how much time would you focus on the education? Meaning, like,
nothing. Right. Listen, total time a day, and I always stick by this, and this is always the right recipe. This is always the right number. Nothing longer than a good movie, and Titanic is not a good movie.
Trust me, I feel you on that.
so it's literally an hour and a half to an hour and 45. I don't care if you break it up. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you do an hour in the morning or 45 minutes at night. I don't care. But if you're doing more than that, your brain, because here's the thing, if you're doing 6-hour study sessions, think about that 2-hour mark and think about how fresh you are past that. And what you'll notice is at the 2-hour mark is kind of where your brain starts to kind of get soft, you know, and that's where kind of like you start to. And here's the thing. When you're studying, when your brain is what I refer to as soft, you're actually not doing anything good. Like you're not putting more information in your head. And it's almost like, you know, it's almost as if like the physiological response is almost as if you're actually like intoxicated and trying to read something and comprehend it.
Understood.
You know, so it's just basically it's almost futile. Like, it's basically like the equivalent of you saying to your friend, you know, you've just had a couple drinks at the bar and you go, you know, do you want to go study now?
Right.
Like that's not a good idea. So the same reason why, you know, that's not a good idea is the reason why. So the physiological response after a while, because like I said, your brain can only handle so much. It's why, listen, I always say this, I go, don't you think that if there was money behind it and the people could do it, like if people could sit for 8 hours, okay, would they not be able to, you know, make an 8-hour movie? So listen, And then people say to me, yeah, but I just binged Cobra Kai. I said, yeah, they broke it down into little half-hour sections. I said, and I said, it was brain candy, because you just basically sat there and had half-hour snippets where basically you had an arc, you had a high, a middle, a low, and then you're like, oh my God, I want to do that again. And it was just basically half-hour snippets.
That is true. Yeah, because I did the same thing. I watched Cobra Kai.
Listen, I literally just did that myself. So I was like, yeah, I could do that. But then think about it. Like if I gave you an 8-hour Cobra Kai movie,
yep.
I think that you would sit there and be like, oh, I don't know about that.
There's a movie right now that I'm breaking up, and it's because it's so long. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's like my wife. My wife, it was funny. She started watching some of the Karate Kid now because she's doing it backwards. Mm-hmm. And what I'll tell you is this: she basically was like midway through, she sat down and she goes, oh, I think I'm gonna just make dinner now. Like I was like, you binge watched the whole season. She goes, yeah, but a movie's different. And the same thing with a study session. If you're doing long study sessions, it's like an 8-hour movie or 6-hour movie. You just don't want to do that. It's not your brains. It's not conducive to actually being successful.
Thank you, Stu. This makes all the difference, I think, in my studies, because you can be too hard on yourself sometimes as well. As people,
absolutely.
When you don't know it. My wife is asking me about variance last night. I'm sitting there like,
yeah. Guess what? Go out and see the light of day. Go out. Here's the thing. You're not going to get a variance question wrong because you don't know what a variance is. You're going to get it wrong because you read the question wrong. And that's not. And here's the thing. The answer to helping yourself with that is not, I need to read more of a definition as to what a variance is. No, the answer is you have to know what they're asking you. You have to pace yourself. This is breathing in a marathon. That's it.
Thank you.
Not a problem. So look, if you need anything else, though, let me know. If not, what I'll do is I'll email you the link once I get this all uploaded. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. You have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.